Story 1. Danielle Nathaniel Simpson was born on October 26, 1979, in Palestine, Texas. Palestine is a small city in Anderson County, located about 100 miles southeast of Dallas. His mother was named Brenda Simpson. He also had a father, but his parents did not have a peaceful relationship. Danielle grew up in a home where his father physically and verbally abused his mother. This happened many times while Danielle and his siblings were present. The abuse created a tense and violent atmosphere in the household. Danielle had several brothers and sisters. One of his younger brothers was named Lionel Simpson. Lionel was about 5 years younger than Danielle. He also had sisters. The family did not have much money. They lived in Palestine, which was a working-class community. Life at home was not stable or calm. When Danielle was old enough, he went to public schools in Palestine. He attended school for a total of 11 years. He did not do well in his classes. He struggled to learn and could not keep up with other students his age. School was not something he enjoyed, and he never finished high school. During his childhood and teenage years, Danielle suffered 2 serious head injuries. The first injury happened when he was playing football. He was knocked unconscious during a game and stayed unconscious for about an hour and a half. This was a severe concussion. The second injury happened when he was thrown from a bucking barrel, which is a machine that simulates the motion of a wild horse or bull. He hit his head hard. Both injuries caused damage to his brain. Later, doctors found that he had 2 large blood clots sitting on both sides of his brain. These clots pressed against his brain tissue. This type of injury can affect a person's behavior, judgment, impulse control, and ability to handle frustration. As a young adult, Danielle worked as a machinist and as a laborer. He held jobs that did not require much education. He did not have a steady career. He spent time with friends and became involved with a local street gang called the Southside Crips. This gang was active in Palestine and was linked to drug dealing, assaults, robberies, and shootings. Danielle had tattoos on his arm that showed his membership in this gang. Danielle had a history of violent behavior toward women. He hit his wife, Jennifer, in the face. He got into a physical fight with his own sister. The fight started because Danielle had fondled his 9-year-old cousin. After the fight, Danielle took a brick and smashed all the windows of his sister's car. He also shot at a former girlfriend using a sawed-off shotgun. He punched another girl in the side of her head during an assault. In 1999, Danielle was arrested and charged with indecency with a child. He pleaded guilty to this charge. The court gave him deferred adjudication, which meant he was placed on probation for 10 years. He was also ordered to complete 600 hours of community service. This was a serious offense, but he was not sent to prison at that time. Danielle also committed several burglaries before the events that would later change his life. He had broken into homes in his neighborhood. Among those homes was the house of an elderly woman who lived a few blocks away from where he stayed. He had burglarized her home at least 2 times before the day that would lead to his arrest and conviction. In those earlier burglaries, he had stolen items and left without being caught. He did not face any consequences for those break-ins. Danielle had a difficult upbringing with violence at home. He did poorly in school. He suffered brain injuries that affected his thinking and judgment. He joined a gang and committed many crimes. He hurt women and children. He broke into houses and stole things. All of these events happened before the crime that would send him to death row. On the morning of January 26, 2000, Danielle Simpson was 20 years old. He was living with his aunts in a house in Palestine, Texas. His wife, Jennifer Simpson, who was 16 years old, lived there with him. Also living in that house was his 13-year-old cousin, Edward McCoy. Their house was only a few blocks away from the home of an elderly woman named Geraldine Davidson. Geraldine Davidson was 84 years old. She was a widow who lived alone. She had been a school teacher in Palestine for many years. She also served as the organist at her Methodist church. She was well known and respected in the community. Danielle Simpson had broken into her house at least 2 times before this day. He knew she lived alone and that she had valuable items inside. On that morning, Simpson asked his cousin Edward McCoy if he wanted to go with him to burglarize Geraldine Davidson's house again. McCoy agreed. Simpson, his wife Jennifer, and McCoy walked around the corner to Davidson's house. They knocked on the front door first to check if anyone was home. No one answered, so they believed the house was empty. Simpson went into Davidson's garage. He found a hammer and a pick. He used these tools to break a window. Jennifer then climbed through the broken window and went to the front door. She opened the door from the inside so that Simpson and McCoy could enter. Once they were all inside, they started gathering items to steal. Jennifer took a ring and some money. Simpson took a watch. About 15 minutes later, while they were still inside the house collecting jewelry and other valuables, Geraldine Davidson returned home. She had been out and came back to her house. When she walked into her kitchen, Simpson came up behind her. He held a knife against her neck. He demanded that she give him money. She was frightened and retrieved money from her purse and handed it to him. Simpson then told McCoy and Jennifer to hold Davidson still while he went to get supplies. He left the room and came back with a pillowcase and a roll of duct tape. He used the duct tape to bind Davidson's hands behind her back. He taped her mouth shut so she could not scream. He told Jennifer to tape Davidson's legs together. Then he pulled the pillowcase over Davidson's head so she could not see anything. After she was fully restrained and blindfolded, Simpson picked her up and threw her over his shoulder. He carried her outside to her own car. He unlocked the trunk and placed her inside. Then he closed the trunk lid. Simpson, Jennifer, and McCoy all got into the car and drove away. They drove to different locations to buy drugs. They purchased marijuana. They also tried to buy crack cocaine, but were unsuccessful. After buying the marijuana, they drove about 10 miles from Palestine to a town called Grapeland. They went to visit Simpson's aunt and her daughter, whose name was Shay. When they arrived, Simpson opened the trunk of the car to show Shay what they had inside. He showed her Geraldine Davidson, who was still alive and bound in the trunk. At one point, Davidson asked for her medicine because she was elderly and needed it. Simpson told her to shut up and slammed the trunk lid closed. For the rest of the afternoon, Simpson drove around Palestine in Davidson's car. He visited different friends and gathered with them at various locations. He opened the trunk several times to show off his captive to other people. In total, 8 to 10 different people at different locations were shown the elderly woman while she was still in the trunk. Jennifer used Davidson's cell phone throughout the day to make calls. None of the people who saw Davidson in the trunk called the police. Later that day, Simpson was joined by his younger brother, Lionel Simpson, who was 15 years old. Lionel suggested that they should kill the victim. After Lionel made this suggestion, Simpson drove the car to a dead-end road. All 4 of them got out of the car. Simpson opened the trunk and pulled Davidson out. He threw her onto the ground. He and Lionel then retaped her arms and legs more tightly than before. They beat her. After that, they put her back into the trunk. The 4 of them then drove to a Jack-in-the-Box fast food restaurant. They all ordered hamburgers and French fries and ate their meals. After eating, they drove to the Neches River. Simpson backed the car up close to the water. He opened the trunk and Lionel pulled Davidson out and threw her onto the ground. Simpson then got a running start. He ran toward Davidson and kicked her in the face with his foot. Lionel took a rope and tied one end around Davidson's legs. Simpson took the other end of the rope and tied it around a heavy cinder block. Simpson then threw the cinder block into the water. Lionel took hold of Davidson's hands while Simpson took hold of her legs. Together, they swung her body and threw her into the river. The cinder block pulled her down into the cold water. A medical examiner would later determine that Geraldine Davidson was still alive when she was thrown into the river and that she drowned. The day after Geraldine Davidson was thrown into the river, a person driving past the Neches River spotted a body floating in the water. That person immediately called the authorities. Police and rescue workers arrived and recovered the body of Geraldine Davidson from the river. An autopsy was performed on her body. The medical examiner determined that she had still been alive at the time she was thrown into the cold water. Her cause of death was drowning. Her hands had been bound behind her back, and a rope with a cinder block had been tied to her legs, which pulled her down into the water. The police began their investigation. They learned that Davidson's car was missing and that her cell phone had been used after she disappeared. The phone records showed calls made by Jennifer Simpson. Witnesses from the community also came forward. Several people who had been shown the victim in the trunk of her car that day told the police what they had seen. These witness statements and the physical evidence led the police to identify Danielle Simpson, his wife Jennifer, his brother Lionel, and his cousin Edward McCoy as the people responsible. All 4 suspects were arrested and charged. Because the murder happened during the course of a kidnapping and robbery, it was considered capital murder under Texas law. The prosecutors decided to seek the death penalty against Danielle Simpson, who was the oldest and the main organizer of the crime. His wife Jennifer was 17 years old at the time of the offense. His brother Lionel was 15. His cousin Edward was 13. Because of their young ages, they were not eligible for the death penalty under Texas law, but they could be tried as adults. The trial for Danielle Simpson began in the 3rd District Court of Anderson County in the fall of 2000. The prosecutor was Doug Lowe, the Anderson County District Attorney. The jury heard testimony from Edward McCoy, who had agreed to testify against Simpson. McCoy described in detail what had happened on that day. The prosecution also presented other witnesses and physical evidence. Simpson did not testify in his own defense. After hearing all the evidence, the jury found Danielle Simpson guilty of capital murder on December 5, 2000. The same jury then moved to the punishment phase, where they had to decide whether Simpson should receive the death penalty or life in prison. During this phase, the prosecution presented evidence of Simpson's violent history. They showed that he was a gang member, that he had assaulted women, that he had committed other burglaries, and that he had been on probation for indecency with a child. A psychiatrist testified that Simpson had antisocial personality disorder and posed a high risk of future violence. The defense presented evidence about his difficult childhood, his brain injuries, and his borderline mental retardation. The jury considered all of this information and answered the special questions required by Texas law. Their answers led to a sentence of death. On December 8, 2000, the judge formally sentenced Danielle Simpson to death by lethal injection. The other 3 defendants received their sentences separately. Lionel Simpson was also convicted of capital murder and was sentenced to life in prison. Jennifer Simpson pleaded guilty to murder and received a 40-year prison sentence. Edward McCoy, because he was only 13, was sent to the Texas Youth Commission. He was later paroled in 2007 at the age of 21, and he served the rest of his 13-year sentence under adult parole supervision. After his conviction, Danielle Simpson began the appeals process. His direct appeal went to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, which affirmed his conviction and death sentence in October 2003. He then filed an application for state habeas corpus relief, which was denied in June 2004. He also filed a petition for federal habeas corpus in federal court. His lawyers argued that he was mentally retarded and therefore could not be executed under the United States Supreme Court's ruling in Atkins v. Virginia. A federal court ordered an evidentiary hearing on that claim. After that hearing, the district court determined that Simpson was not mentally retarded. His appeal of that decision was later dismissed. In 2009, Simpson wrote letters to the federal court asking to waive his remaining appeals. He said he was tired of living on death row and that he was ready to die. A competency hearing was held, and a judge ruled that Simpson was mentally competent to make that decision. His lawyers filed motions to stop the execution, and Simpson temporarily changed his mind and allowed them to continue his appeals. His attorneys argued that he was mentally ill and incapable of deciding to drop his appeals. They also challenged the jury selection process, noting that no black people served on the jury that convicted him. However, the courts rejected these late appeals. The Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles denied requests for clemency. The United States Supreme Court also rejected a last-day appeal on the day of his scheduled execution. On November 18, 2009, Danielle Simpson was taken to the death chamber at the Huntsville unit in Texas. His final meal consisted of 4 pieces of fried chicken, gravy, biscuits, and milk. He was strapped to the gurney. He spoke his final words, saying that he loved his family and that he was ready. He did not acknowledge or speak to the members of Geraldine Davidson's family who were present in the viewing room. The lethal injection was then administered. The drugs caused him to lose consciousness and stop breathing. He was pronounced dead at 6:32 p.m. Central Daylight Time. He was 30 years old. Geraldine Davidson's family had waited nearly 10 years for this final closure, but the loss of their mother, grandmother, and friend could never be fully undone. Story 2. Robert Lee Thompson was born on April 1st, 1975 in Houston, Texas. Houston is a large city where Robert spent his entire childhood. His family did not have a stable home life. When Robert was still very young, both of his parents were sent to prison for crimes they had committed. This meant that Robert could not live with his mother or father while he was growing up. Because his parents were locked up, Robert went to live with his grandmother. His grandmother took on the responsibility of raising him. She gave him a place to live and tried to provide for him. But she was an older woman, and she did not have much money. The family lived in poor neighborhoods in Houston. These were areas where many families struggled to pay their bills and find good jobs. Robert went to school like other children. He attended school for 10 years in total. He did not finish high school. He left school before getting his diploma. After he left school, he tried to find work. He held different jobs, but the records do not show exactly what kind of work he did. He did not have any criminal record as a young person. He had never been sent to prison before the events that would come later in his life. As a young man, Robert had a girlfriend. His girlfriend became pregnant. This was a very stressful time for Robert. He felt a lot of pressure because he was going to become a father. He did not have a good job. He did not have much money. He worried about how he would support his girlfriend and his future child. This pressure weighed on his mind and made him think deeply about his life and his future. Robert was an African American man. He paid close attention to the way people in his community were treated. He noticed that many stores in his neighborhood were owned by people who were from other countries. These owners were from places like Japan, China, Vietnam, and the Middle East. Robert felt that these store owners came to America, opened businesses in black neighborhoods, and then took money out of those communities. He believed they did not give back to the neighborhoods where they made their money. Robert also felt that these store owners treated black customers badly. He noticed that when black people went into these stores, the owners would watch them very closely. They would follow them around the store. Robert believed that the owners thought black people were going to steal things just because of the color of their skin. This made Robert feel uncomfortable and angry. He felt that he could not shop in his own neighborhood without being treated like a criminal. Robert thought a lot about inequality. He looked at the news and noticed that black people were mostly shown in a negative way. He saw reports about black people committing crimes and getting arrested. He did not see positive stories about black people on the news. He knew that black people could be doctors, lawyers, and business owners, but he felt that those stories were never told. He felt that black people were not given the same chances as others. Robert tried to improve his own life. He wanted to start a small business. He tried to get a grant, which is money given by the government to help people start businesses. But he said that he could not get one. He said that he had good credit and no bad debt, but the opportunities never came to him. He saw that people from other countries could come to America and get money from the government to open stores and send their children to school. He felt that this was unfair. He wondered why black Americans could not get the same help. During this time in his life, Robert began to think about God. He started talking to God in his mind. He believed that God was speaking to him. He believed that God was telling him that something needed to be done. He believed that the store owners who treated black people badly were going to be punished by God. He thought that God might use him as a tool to deliver that punishment. He did not think of himself as a bad person for having these thoughts. He believed that what he was thinking was part of God's plan. Robert's life was not full of crime before this time. He had never been arrested. He had never spent time in jail. He did not have a history of violence. He was just a young man who felt frustrated and angry about the way he and other black people were treated. He felt that the system was stacked against him. He felt that he could not get a good job, could not start a business, and could not even shop in his own neighborhood without being watched and suspected of stealing. These feelings built up inside him over many years. He did not talk about them to many people. He kept his thoughts to himself. He believed that his anger was justified. He believed that he was standing up for his community. He believed that God had chosen him to do something about the injustice he saw every day. But he did not act on these thoughts right away. He continued to live his life, trying to make ends meet and dealing with the pressure of his girlfriend's pregnancy and his uncertain future. Robert's grandmother continued to support him. She loved him and wanted the best for him. His mother was still in prison, but she also loved him and kept in touch. Robert had friends in his neighborhood. One of his friends was a young man named Sammy Butler. They spent time together and talked about their lives. Robert shared some of his feelings with Sammy, but not everything. Robert was a young man who felt trapped. He was poor. He had no education beyond the 10th grade. He could not find good work. His girlfriend was going to have a baby. He was angry at the world. He believed that God was telling him to take action. All of these thoughts and feelings were growing stronger inside him. He did not know how to change his situation in a positive way. He only knew that he was unhappy, and he wanted things to be different. At the time, Robert was in his early 20s. He had his whole life ahead of him, but he felt like he had no choices. He felt like he had been pushed into a corner. He felt like he had to do something, even if that something was wrong. He did not think about the consequences of his actions. He only thought about the anger that was building inside him. His grandmother, his mother, and his friends did not know that Robert was thinking about doing something terrible. They only saw a young man who was struggling, like so many others in his neighborhood. Robert Lee Thompson made a decision. He decided to rob convenience stores. He did this together with his friend, Sammy Butler. They planned to go into stores, take money, and leave. They carried guns with them. Thompson had a small .25 caliber semi-automatic pistol. Butler had a .38 caliber revolver. Both guns were loaded with bullets. They believed that carrying guns would make store workers give them money without fighting back. They started robbing stores in late 1996. Over a period of about 2 months, they carried out at least 8 robberies. They targeted convenience stores in Houston. These were small shops that sold food, drinks, and lottery tickets. The stores were often run by people from other countries. Thompson had strong feelings about these store owners, as he had thought about for a long time. He believed that what he was doing was justified. He did not think of himself as a criminal. He believed that God had chosen him to punish these store owners for how they treated black customers. The robberies were violent. In 3 of the robberies, someone was killed. Thompson admitted later that he was the person who fired the deadly shots in 2 of those murders. The 3rd murder happened on December 5th, 1996, at a store called 7 Evenings Food Store in Houston. This was the store where the final killing took place. Thompson and Butler chose this store because it was familiar to them. They had been there before. Thompson had even bought a beer there earlier that same day. On December 5th, 1996, Thompson and Butler went to the 7 Evenings store. They took their guns with them. They entered the store together. Inside, there were 2 store clerks working. The first clerk was named Mubarak Ali Mirdia. He was standing at the cash register. The second clerk was named Mansur by Rahim Muhammad. He was the cousin of Mirdia. Rahim was standing near the back of the store, near the meat counter. Thompson walked directly to the counter where Mirdia was standing. He pulled out his .25 caliber pistol. He pointed the gun at Mirdia's body. He told Mirdia to open the cash register and hand over all the money inside. Mirdia was scared. He did not move quickly enough for Thompson. Thompson became angry because Mirdia was not fast. He pulled the trigger and shot Mirdia in the stomach. The bullet went into Mirdia's abdomen and he fell to the floor. At the same time, Rahim saw what was happening. He started to run toward the back of the store. He was trying to get away from the shooter. Thompson saw Rahim moving. He raised his gun and fired shots in Rahim's direction. He was trying to hit Rahim, but he missed. Rahim continued to move toward the back. While Rahim was running, Thompson turned his attention back to Mirdia. Mirdia was lying on the floor. He had already been shot once. Thompson stood over him. He fired his gun 3 more times. Each bullet hit Mirdia's body. Mirdia was badly hurt, but he was still alive. He could not move much because of the pain. Thompson then gave Mirdia an order. He told him to get up off the floor and get the money from the cash register. Mirdia was in terrible pain, but he was afraid. He forced himself to stand up. He opened the cash register and took the money out. He handed the money to Thompson. After Thompson had the money, he decided to kill Mirdia. He put his pistol directly against Mirdia's neck. He pulled the trigger. The gun made a clicking sound, but did not fire. Thompson had already fired all of his bullets. He had used them all when he shot Mirdia the first 4 times, and when he shot at Rahim. He was out of ammunition. Thompson was frustrated that the gun did not fire. He did not want to leave Mirdia alive. He took the butt of the gun, which is the heavy handle part, and hit Mirdia on the head with it. He hit him hard. Then he picked up the cash register drawer, which was a heavy metal tray. He struck Mirdia on the head with that as well. He wanted to make sure that Mirdia would not be able to call for help or chase him. After he had the money and had beaten Mirdia, Thompson ran out of the store. Butler followed him, but before Butler left, he grabbed something else. He took a stack of lottery tickets from the counter. These were tickets that customers bought to try to win money. Butler grabbed them and ran out behind Thompson. Thompson got into their car. He sat in the driver's seat. He started the engine. Butler got into the passenger seat. Butler did not close his window. He rolled it down instead. He had his .38 caliber revolver in his hand. Meanwhile, Rahim had not been killed yet. He had been hiding near the back of the store during the shooting. But when he saw Thompson and Butler running out, he made a decision. He ran toward the front door of the store. He wanted to see where the robbers were going. He wanted to get a look at their car or their license plate. He ran to the door and looked out into the parking lot. Butler saw Rahim at the door. He raised his revolver and aimed at the door. He fired 2 shots through the glass door. The bullets went through the glass. One of the bullets hit Rahim in the chest. The bullet went into his body and damaged his heart and lungs. Rahim fell to the ground immediately. He died right there at the front door of the store. Thompson and Butler drove away fast. They left both clerks behind. One clerk, Mirdia, was on the floor inside the store. He had been shot 4 times, beaten on the head, and was bleeding badly, but he was still alive. The other clerk, Rahim, was dead at the door. Thompson and Butler did not stay to see what happened. They just drove off with the money. That night, Thompson and Butler had completed their last robbery. But they had committed many other crimes in the weeks before that. They had robbed those other stores. They had killed 2 other clerks in separate incidents. In those 2 earlier killings, Thompson was the one who shot the victims. He admitted that later. Thompson did not feel sorry for what he had done. He believed that the store owners had brought this on themselves. He thought that their treatment of black people was so wrong that they deserved to be punished. He believed that God was using him to deliver that punishment. He did not see himself as a murderer. He saw himself as a person who was carrying out a mission. The crimes were not carefully planned in advance. They were impulsive. Thompson said later that he just acted without thinking. He would go into a store, pull out his gun, and demand money. If someone did not cooperate quickly, he shot them. He did not try to hide his face. He did not use disguises. He just walked in and did what he wanted. He thought that he was right and that God would protect him. During the robbery at the 7 Evenings store, Thompson used several methods. He used his gun as a threat. He used it to shoot when people did not obey. He used the cash register drawer as a weapon. He used the car to make a fast escape. He worked together with Butler. Butler also used his gun to shoot and kill Rahim. They helped each other. Thompson drove the car. Butler fired the killing shot. But Thompson had already shot at Rahim earlier. Both men were involved in the killing. The victims in this crime were both clerks. Mirdia survived, but he was badly hurt. He spent a long time in the hospital recovering from his wounds. He was in terrible pain. Rahim died that night. He was 29 years old. He was a young man with a family. His cousin watched him get shot and killed. Mirdia saw everything happen. He saw his cousin fall and die. That memory stayed with him forever. During the robbery, there were customers in the store as well. Butler threatened some of them with his gun. He pointed his revolver at them and told them to stay still. The customers were terrified. They had to watch the violence. They could not help the clerks because Butler was standing near the door, blocking their way. They were trapped inside while the shooting happened. After Thompson and Butler drove away, they did not return to the store. They did not try to help anyone. They went back to their normal lives. They did not think about the dead man or the injured clerk. They spent the money they had stolen. They continued to live in Houston as if nothing had happened. But they had left behind many witnesses. Mirdia was still alive and would later tell the police everything. The customers in the store could also describe what they saw. Thompson had done something that could not be undone. He had killed people. He had hurt others. He had broken the law in the worst way possible. But at that moment, he did not think about that. He only thought about his anger and his belief that God was on his side. He did not know that his actions would lead to consequences that would change the rest of his life forever. After Thompson and Butler drove away from the 7 Evenings store, the customers who had been inside called the police. They dialed 911 and reported the shooting. Officers arrived at the store within a short time. They found Mirdia lying on the floor inside. He was bleeding heavily from his 4 gunshot wounds. They found Rahim lying dead at the front door. Emergency medical workers took Mirdia to the hospital. He received surgery and other treatments. He survived his injuries, but he spent a long time recovering in the hospital. The police began their investigation right away. They talked to the customers who were in the store during the robbery. Those witnesses gave descriptions of the 2 armed men. They also gave descriptions of the car that the men drove away in. Mirdia was taken to the hospital, but the police spoke with him there. He was able to describe what happened. He told them that 2 men came in, that one of them shot him, and that the other shot his cousin Rahim. The police gathered evidence from the store. They found bullet casings on the floor. They found the cash register drawer that Thompson had used to hit Mirdia. They reviewed any security footage that the store might have had. They worked to connect the descriptions of the robbers to people in the area. The police also looked at other recent convenience store robberies in Houston. They saw that there had been a pattern of similar crimes. This helped them figure out who might be responsible. Thompson and Butler did not go into hiding. They did not flee Houston. They stayed in their homes and acted like nothing had happened. This made it easier for the police to find them. The police followed leads and identified Thompson and Butler as suspects. They arrested both men. The exact date of their arrest is not detailed in the records, but it happened soon after December 5th, 1996. After his arrest, Thompson was taken to a police station. He sat in an interview room with detectives. The detectives asked him questions about the robberies. Thompson began to talk. He told them everything. He admitted that he and Butler had committed the robbery at the 7 Evenings store. He admitted that he had shot Mirdia several times. He admitted that Butler had shot and killed Rahim. But he did not stop there. Thompson also told the detectives about the other robberies. He admitted that he and Butler had committed at least 8 robberies over a 2-month period. He admitted that in 2 of the other robberies, he himself had shot and killed the store clerks. He gave the detectives a long and detailed confession. He spoke for a long time. He explained his beliefs about God and the store owners. The detectives recorded his confession on tape. That tape was later used as evidence. With Thompson's confession and the witness statements, the police had a strong case. Thompson was formally charged with capital murder for the death of Mansur by Rahim Muhammad. The law in Texas said that a person could be found guilty of capital murder even if they did not personally fire the deadly shot. Under the law of parties, a person who helps commit a robbery can be held responsible if someone dies during that robbery, as long as the death should have been anticipated. Thompson had planned the robbery with Butler. He had brought a gun. He had shot at Rahim. He had helped Butler by driving the getaway car. The prosecutors believed that Thompson was fully responsible for Rahim's death. Thompson's trial began in March 1998. The trial took place in Harris County, Texas. The jury was selected from the community. Both sides presented their evidence. The prosecutors showed the jury the taped confession that Thompson had given to the police. They called Mirdia to the witness stand. He was able to testify about what happened that night. He told the jury that Thompson shot him, beat him, and then tried to shoot him in the neck. He told them that his cousin Rahim was killed by the other robber. The customers who were in the store also testified. They described the fear they felt and what they saw. The prosecutors also presented evidence that Thompson had committed other robberies and murders. They told the jury that this was not a single event. Thompson's lawyers tried to defend him. They argued that Thompson did not fire the shot that killed Rahim. They argued that Thompson could not have anticipated that Butler would shoot Rahim as they were driving away. But the evidence against Thompson was very strong. The jury listened to all the testimony and looked at all the evidence. On March 25, 1998, the jury reached a verdict. They found Robert Lee Thompson guilty of capital murder. The trial then moved to the punishment phase. The jury had to decide whether Thompson should be sentenced to death or to life in prison. The prosecutors presented evidence that Thompson was dangerous. They showed that he had killed before and that he would likely kill again. They reminded the jury of the 2 other murders that Thompson had confessed to. Thompson's lawyers asked the jury to spare his life. They pointed out that he was young and had no prior criminal record. They called witnesses who said he was not a bad person, but the jury was not convinced. They answered the special questions that Texas law required. They found that Thompson would be a future danger to society. They found that he had intended to kill or anticipated that a life would be taken. They found that there were no mitigating circumstances that would justify a life sentence. On April 1, 1998, the judge officially sentenced Robert Lee Thompson to death by lethal injection. While Thompson was waiting on death row, his accomplice Sammy Butler was tried separately. Butler's trial happened about 6 months after Thompson's trial. The jury in Butler's case heard different evidence. They were not allowed to hear the full confession that Thompson had made about the other murders. They only heard evidence about the robbery at the Seven Evenings store. The jury in Butler's case found him guilty of a lesser offense called felony murder. This meant they believed he had caused a death during a robbery, but did not intend to kill. They sentenced Butler to life in prison instead of death. This difference in outcomes became important later. Thompson did not accept his death sentence. He decided to appeal. His lawyers filed an appeal with the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. They argued that there were errors in his trial. They said that a juror had made a racist comment that the judge did not investigate. They said that the police officer's testimony about Thompson's truthfulness should not have been allowed. They said that his lawyers had not done a good job. They asked the court to give him a new trial or reduce his sentence. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals reviewed all of these claims. On June 25, 2003, they issued a decision. They found that Thompson's trial had been fair. They affirmed his conviction and his death sentence. Thompson then asked the United States Supreme Court to review his case. On December 15, 2003, the Supreme Court refused to hear the case. Thompson also filed a state habeas corpus petition. This is a separate legal process where a prisoner asks the court to review their conviction because of new evidence or legal errors. Thompson argued that he was factually innocent of capital murder because Butler had only been convicted of felony murder. He argued that since Butler did not intend to kill, Thompson should not be held responsible for capital murder. He also argued that his trial lawyers should have asked for a lesser charge of felony murder to be given to the jury. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals reviewed these arguments carefully. On November 9, 2005, they issued a decision. They rejected Thompson's claims. They explained that under Texas law, Thompson could be found guilty of capital murder, even if Butler was only found guilty of felony murder. They said that Thompson's own actions showed that he intended to kill. They also said that his lawyers had made reasonable strategic decisions. They denied his request for relief. Thompson then filed a federal habeas corpus petition. He asked a federal court to review his case. He made many of the same arguments. He also asked for a certificate of appealability so that he could appeal to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. On November 30, 2007, the federal district court denied his petition. The court found that his conviction and sentence did not violate the Constitution. Thompson asked the Fifth Circuit for permission to appeal. On August 19, 2008, the Fifth Circuit denied him a certificate of appealability. This meant they agreed that his claims did not have merit. Thompson then asked the United States Supreme Court to review the federal court decisions. On March 23, 2009, the Supreme Court refused to hear his case again. At this point, Thompson had exhausted all of his legal appeals. The state of Texas set an execution date. He was scheduled to be executed on November 19, 2009. As the date approached, Thompson's lawyers made one final effort. They filed a petition with the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles. They asked the board to recommend that Governor Rick Perry commute Thompson's death sentence to life in prison. They argued that Thompson's case was similar to another case where the governor had granted clemency. They pointed out that Thompson was not the actual shooter in Raheem's death. They argued that the death penalty was too harsh for him compared to Butler's life sentence. The board considered this request. On November 18, 2009, they voted. The vote was 5-2 in favor of recommending clemency. This was a rare outcome. It had only happened 2 other times during Governor Perry's time in office. The board recommended that Thompson's sentence be changed to life in prison, but the board's recommendation was not legally binding. The governor had the final decision. Governor Perry reviewed the case. On the morning of November 19, 2009, he issued a statement. He said that he had reviewed all the facts. He noted that Thompson had a murderous history and had participated in the killing. He decided to uphold the jury's verdict and the death sentence. He rejected the board's recommendation. Later that same day, Thompson's lawyers made one last appeal to the United States Supreme Court. They asked the justices to stop the execution. They raised questions about the competence of his trial lawyers. The Supreme Court reviewed the request. On the evening of November 19, 2009, they denied the appeal. There were no more legal options left. That evening, Thompson was taken to the execution chamber at the Huntsville unit in Texas. He was strapped to a gurney. A needle was placed in his arm. The lethal injection drugs were prepared. Thompson was given a chance to make a final statement. He spoke briefly. He invoked Allah, as he had converted to Islam while in prison. He thanked his friends and his mother for their love and support. He looked at his mother, who was watching through a window. She was sobbing and crying. He told her to smile, be happy, and not cry. He said he had not meant any harm to the victims' families. None of the victims' family members were present to watch. He said he knew that Allah would forgive him. Then the lethal injection began. The drugs entered his body and stopped his heart. At 6:19 p.m., he was pronounced dead. He was 34 years old. After the execution, the story concluded. The victims' families were left to grieve. Mirja, who survived the shooting, had to live with the memory of what happened to him and his cousin. He carried those wounds for the rest of his life. Rahim's family lost a young man who was only 29 years old. Thompson's mother and grandmother lost a son and a grandson. Butler remained in prison, serving his life sentence. Thompson was buried, and the case was closed. Robert Lee Thompson was the 1,184th person executed in the United States since 1976, and the 446th person executed in Texas since that year. His life ended on that gurney, and the story of his crimes and his punishment was complete. Robert Lee Thompson was executed on November 19, 2009, and his death brought a final end to the legal proceedings that began with the murder of Mansur by Rahim Muhammad on December 5, 1996. Story 3. Cecil C. Johnson Jr. was born on August 29, 1956, in Maury County, Tennessee. He came into a world that was not easy. His parents had 10 children in total, and Cecil was the oldest. Being the oldest meant he had a lot of responsibility from a very young age. He had to help take care of his younger brothers and sisters while his parents worked. The family did not have much money. They lived in poverty, which meant they often struggled to pay for food, clothes, and a place to live. Johnson's childhood was marked by hardship and abuse. He grew up in a home where there was not enough love or guidance. His parents were busy trying to survive, so they did not have time to give him the attention he needed. He experienced physical and emotional abuse during his early years. This made him feel angry and confused. He did not learn how to handle his feelings in a healthy way. Instead, he often acted out and caused trouble. His home life was unstable, and he never felt safe or secure. School was also very difficult for Johnson. He did not enjoy going to classes, and he found it hard to pay attention to his teachers. He fell behind in his reading and math skills. Because he was struggling, he started to skip classes and not do his homework. His teachers did not give him the extra help he needed to catch up. By the time he was a teenager, Johnson had made the decision to drop out of school. He left in the 9th grade, which meant he never received a high school diploma. Without an education, he had very few job options available to him. After leaving school, Johnson had to find work to support himself. He took on low-paying jobs that did not require a diploma. He worked as a dishwasher and later as a cook. These jobs were hard and did not pay much money, but they gave him a way to survive. When he was around 21 years old, Johnson got married. He and his wife started a family together, and they had at least one child, a daughter. For a while, he tried to build a normal life. He worked at Vanderbilt University, where he held a job as a dishwasher and cook. This was a steady job, and it gave him a routine to follow each day. In his free time, Johnson liked to spend time with friends and hang out in his neighborhood. He did not have many hobbies or interests that were positive. He often spent time just walking around, talking to people, and looking for something to do. He did not have a strong group of friends who encouraged him to make good choices. Instead, he spent time with people who also did not have clear goals in life. He did not have any serious criminal record at this point, but he did not have a stable direction either. Johnson's marriage did not last. The relationship between him and his wife fell apart over time. They separated, and he no longer lived with his family. This made him feel even more alone and upset. He continued to work at Vanderbilt, but he started to feel stuck in his life. He was in his early 20s, without an education, without a stable family, and without a clear future. He lived day to day without thinking about the long term. His friends and neighbors saw him as a regular person who kept to himself, but there were signs that he was not handling his life well. He seemed restless and unhappy, and he did not have anyone to guide him toward better choices. Johnson's father was still living in the same neighborhood, and Johnson would visit him often. The area where they lived was known as the 12 South neighborhood in Nashville, Tennessee. It was a mixed area with houses and small businesses. Johnson was familiar with the local stores and the people who owned them. He would stop by different places to buy things or just talk to people. He was known in the community, but he was not known as a troublemaker. He simply existed quietly, working his job and trying to get by. By the summer of 1980, Johnson was 23 years old. He was living a simple life that did not have much meaning or purpose. He worked his job at Vanderbilt, but he did not have any plans for the future. He did not save money or think about improving his situation. He spent his days doing the same things over and over again. He was not happy, but he did not know how to change his life. He continued to visit his father's house regularly, and he still spent time with friends who lived nearby. Nothing in his past had prepared him for making good decisions under pressure. His childhood had taught him that life was hard and unfair, and he had learned to just accept whatever came his way without fighting back or trying to improve things. On July 5th, 1980, Johnson was 23 years old and living his usual routine. That day was a Saturday. It was a hot summer evening in Nashville. Johnson spent part of the day with his friend Victor Davis. They were driving around in Davis's car. They went to Franklin, Tennessee, which is a town outside Nashville. They were just passing time, looking for things to do. There was no plan at that point to commit a crime. Later that evening, around 9:25 p.m., Johnson and Davis left Franklin and drove back toward Nashville. They arrived in the area near 12th Avenue South shortly before 10 p.m. This was the neighborhood where Johnson grew up and where his father still lived. Johnson was very familiar with this area. He knew the stores and the people who ran them. One of those stores was Bob Bell's Market. It was a small convenience store that sold food and everyday items. Bob Bell Sr. had owned this market for about 8 years. It had never been robbed before. Johnson got out of Davis's car near the market. Before he left, he told Davis that he was going to rob the store. He also said he was going to try not to leave any witnesses. This meant he planned to kill anyone who could identify him. Davis stayed in the car and waited for Johnson to come back. Johnson walked into Bob Bell's Market carrying a 6-shot revolver handgun. Inside the store at that time were 3 people. Bob Bell Sr. was the owner. He was 41 years old. His 12-year-old son, Bobby Bell Jr., was helping behind the cash register. The boy was working that night, selling cokes and snacks to customers. Also in the store was Lewis Smith. A friend of Bob Bell Sr. Smith was working on a boat motor for Bell. The 3 of them were getting ready to close the store for the night. When Johnson entered, he pointed his gun at Bob Bell Sr. He ordered Bell and Lewis Smith to go behind the counter where young Bobby was standing. They obeyed because they were scared. Johnson now had all three of them trapped behind the counter. While Johnson was holding them at gunpoint, a woman named Deborah Smith entered the store with two children. She was a customer who came to buy something. Johnson did not want her to see the robbery, so he hid his gun. He told Bell and the others to act normal and wait on the customer. They did what he said. Deborah Smith bought a soft drink and left with her children. She did not know a robbery was happening. After she left, Johnson ordered young Bobby Bell to take the money from the cash register and put it into a bag. The boy was crying, but he did what he was told. He was scared and obedient. He filled the bag with cash and gave it to Johnson. Then Johnson searched Bob Bell Sr. and Lewis Smith. He took Smith's wallet. He was looking for money and identification. At that moment, a man named Charles House walked into the store. He was 35 years old. He knew Johnson from the neighborhood. Johnson saw him and ordered him to leave. Charles House obeyed and walked back outside. Right after that, Johnson started shooting. He shot the 12-year-old boy first. Bobby Bell Jr. was shot in the head. He fell to the floor. He was killed instantly. Lewis Smith saw the boy fall and jumped on top of him to protect him. But Johnson kept shooting. Smith was shot in the throat and in his hand. He was badly wounded, but he survived. Then Johnson walked toward Bob Bell Sr., who was on the floor behind the counter. Johnson pointed the gun at Bell's head and pulled the trigger. But Bell threw his hands up to protect his face. The bullet hit Bell in his wrist instead of his head. The bullet broke his wrist, but he survived. Bell was now wounded and unable to fight back. Johnson ran out of the store. As he left, he saw a taxicab parked near the entrance. Inside the cab were two men. One was the driver, James E. Moore, who was 41 years old. The other was the passenger, Charles House, the same man who had just walked into the store and been ordered out. They were just sitting in the cab, waiting. Johnson fired 2 more shots into the cab. He shot both men. James Moore and Charles House died from their gunshot wounds. These were the last 2 bullets in Johnson's 6-shot revolver. Bob Bell Sr. got up and grabbed a shotgun from under the counter. He wanted to chase Johnson, but his wrist was broken and he could not fire the gun. He ran outside and saw Johnson standing by the cab. He saw the 2 men inside the cab had been shot. He tried to chase Johnson, but Johnson got away. After the shooting, Johnson ran to a nearby spot where Victor Davis was waiting in the car. Johnson was carrying the bag of money and the gun. When he got into Davis's car, he said, "I didn't mean to shoot that boy." He threw the gun away. Davis later picked up the gun and sold it the next day for $40. Johnson and Davis then drove to Johnson's father's house, which was only about a block away from the store. They arrived shortly after 10 p.m. Johnson's father was at home watching television. Johnson took the money out of the bag and counted it. He had about $200 in cash. He gave $40 to Victor Davis. Johnson told his father that he and Davis had won the money from gambling. His father believed this story and did not ask any more questions. Later that night, Johnson called his girlfriend on the telephone. He asked her to say that he had been at his father's house before 10 p.m. He was trying to create an alibi. He wanted people to believe he was not at the store during the robbery. He then went out to have a beer with some friends in the neighborhood. He acted calm and normal. He did not show any signs of guilt or sadness. The next day, Johnson went about his usual activities. He went to work and acted like nothing had happened. But the police were already investigating the shootings. They had interviewed Bob Bell Sr. and Lewis Smith in the hospital. Both men had given descriptions of the shooter. Bell told police that he recognized the gunman as someone who had been a customer in his store before. He knew the face but did not know the name. The police used this information to start looking for suspects. Later, Johnson heard that the police were looking for him. He decided to go to the police station on his own. He did not run away. He met with the police and told them he was in Franklin, Tennessee, with friends at the time of the shootings. He said he and Victor Davis were just driving around that evening. He claimed he had nothing to do with the robbery or the murders. He told reporters that he felt like he was in a bad dream. He said he thought Bob Bell Sr. had made a mistake in identifying him. He insisted he was innocent. At this point, the police had not arrested Johnson yet. They were still gathering information. Victor Davis was still giving statements that supported Johnson's alibi. Davis said that he and Johnson were together the whole evening and never went to the market. So the police did not have a strong case yet because Davis was backing up Johnson's story. But that situation would change later. For now, the crimes had been committed. 3 people were dead. A 12-year-old boy named Bobby Bell Jr., a 41-year-old cab driver named James Moore, and a 35-year-old passenger named Charles House. 2 other people, Bob Bell Sr. and Lewis Smith, were wounded but alive. The shooter had taken about $200 from the store. No weapon was recovered by the police at that time. Johnson had given $40 to his friend and kept the rest. He continued to live his normal life while the police continued to investigate. 5 years later, in 1985, Johnson committed another crime while he was already in prison. This second crime happened at the Old Tennessee Penitentiary, which was the prison where Johnson was being held on death row. Johnson and another death row inmate attacked a fellow prisoner named LaRon Williams. Williams was also on death row for killing a police officer and a priest. The attack happened during an exercise period when inmates were allowed to be outside their cells. Johnson and the other inmate beat Williams to death. Williams died from the injuries he received during that assault. Johnson was later charged with voluntary manslaughter for this killing and was convicted along with another inmate. After the shootings on July 5, 1980, the police began their investigation immediately. They interviewed Bob Bell Sr. and Lewis Smith while both men were still in the hospital recovering from their wounds. Bell told the police that he recognized the shooter as someone who had been a customer in his store before. He gave a description of the man. The police used this information to narrow down their search for suspects. They also spoke to other people in the neighborhood who might have seen something. On July 6, 1980, Johnson heard that the police were looking for him. He decided to go to the police station on his own. He met with detectives and gave them his version of events. He told them he was in Franklin, Tennessee, with his friend Victor Davis at the time of the shootings. He insisted that he had nothing to do with the robbery or the murders. The police, however, had enough information from Bob Bell Sr. to arrest Johnson. Johnson was taken into custody on that same day, July 6, 1980. He was surprised when he was arrested and denied bond. He continued to maintain that he was innocent. For several months after the arrest, Victor Davis supported Johnson's alibi. Davis told both the police and Johnson's defense lawyers that he and Johnson had been together all evening and had never gone to Bell's Market. Because Davis was willing to testify for Johnson, the defense planned to use him as their main alibi witness at trial. The prosecution, however, did not stop investigating. About a week before the trial was set to begin, something changed. On January 9, 1981, Victor Davis was arrested on unrelated charges. He was stopped by police near a gas station and arrested for public drunkenness and carrying a weapon. These were minor charges, but they gave the prosecution a chance to talk to Davis. The police took Davis to the district attorney's office late at night. There, prosecutors questioned him for several hours. They told him that if he had any involvement in the Bell's Market crimes, they could bring charges against him. They offered him immunity from prosecution in exchange for his truthful testimony. Davis agreed to talk. He gave a new statement that completely changed the case. In his new statement, Davis said that he had dropped Johnson off near Bell's Market just before 10 p.m. on July 5th. He said Johnson told him he was going to rob the store and would try not to leave any witnesses. Davis also said that Johnson later got back in the car, said, "I didn't mean to shoot that boy," and threw away the gun. Davis also revealed that he had retrieved the gun and sold it for $40, and that Johnson had given him $40 from the stolen money. 2 days later, on January 12, 1981, Davis went back to the district attorney's office with his own lawyer. He repeated his new story, signed a written statement, and formally accepted the offer of immunity. The charges of public drunkenness and carrying a weapon were later dismissed. Johnson's trial began on January 13, 1981, in Davidson County, Tennessee. The prosecution presented the testimony of 4 main witnesses. Bob Bell Sr. identified Johnson as the shooter. Lewis Smith also identified Johnson. Deborah Smith, the customer who had entered the store during the robbery, testified that she saw Johnson behind the counter. Victor Davis, who had been Johnson's alibi witness, now testified against him. Davis told the jury everything Johnson had said and done on the night of the crimes. The prosecution also presented evidence that Johnson had told his father the money came from gambling, which was a lie. There was no physical evidence recovered by the police. No murder weapon was ever found, and no stolen money was ever recovered from Johnson. Johnson took the stand in his own defense. He denied being at Bell's Market on July 5th. He told the jury that he never left Davis's car on the trip from Franklin to his father's house. He claimed that the money he counted at his father's house was money he had won from gambling. His father testified that Johnson arrived a few minutes before 10 p.m., which supported Johnson's alibi. But the jury did not believe Johnson's story. They found the testimony of the 4 prosecution witnesses to be more convincing. On January 19, 1981, the jury found Johnson guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of Bobby Bell Jr., James Moore, and Charles House. He was also found guilty of 2 counts of assault with intent to commit murder for shooting Bob Bell Sr. and Lewis Smith, and 2 counts of armed robbery. The jury then had to decide on the punishment. After hearing the evidence, the jury recommended that Johnson be sentenced to death on each of the 3 murder convictions. They also recommended consecutive life sentences for the other crimes. The trial judge accepted this recommendation and formally imposed the death sentence. After the conviction, Johnson's attorneys began the appeals process. The first appeal went directly to the Tennessee Supreme Court in 1982. Johnson's lawyers argued that the prosecution had acted improperly in converting Victor Davis into a witness. They also argued that the trial court had made errors in allowing certain evidence and excluding other evidence. The Tennessee Supreme Court reviewed all the arguments and affirmed the convictions and the death sentences on May 3, 1982. The court found that the evidence was sufficient and that Johnson had received a fair trial. Johnson then asked the United States Supreme Court to review his case, but on October 4, 1982, the Supreme Court declined to hear it. While Johnson was on death row, he was involved in another violent incident. In 1985, Johnson and another death row inmate attacked fellow prisoner LaRon Williams during an exercise period at the Old Tennessee Penitentiary. They beat Williams to death. Williams had been sentenced to death for killing a police officer and a priest. Johnson was later charged with voluntary manslaughter for this killing. He was convicted alongside the other inmate. This second crime added more weight to Johnson's record and showed that he had been violent even while in prison. In the years that followed, Johnson continued to file legal challenges. In 1990, the Tennessee Supreme Court reviewed another round of post-conviction claims and again denied relief. Johnson then filed a petition for a writ of habeas corpus in federal court in 1991. While that case was pending, his attorneys made a discovery. In 1992, they obtained police reports under the Tennessee Open Records Act that had never been given to them before the trial. These reports showed that some eyewitnesses had given inconsistent descriptions of the shooter. For example, one report indicated that Lewis Smith had said he could not see the assailant's face and had not picked Johnson out of a photo lineup. Another report showed that Bob Bell Sr. had initially said the shooter had no facial hair, which contradicted Johnson's appearance. Johnson's lawyers argued that the prosecution had withheld this evidence, which was a violation of their constitutional duty to disclose favorable evidence to the defense. This is known as a Brady violation. The federal courts considered this new claim. In 2008, the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit reviewed Johnson's habeas petition and ruled against him. The majority of the judges found that even though the evidence had been withheld, it was not significant enough to have changed the outcome of the trial. They believed that the eyewitness identifications were strong enough on their own. One judge, however, strongly disagreed. Judge R. Guy Cole Jr. wrote a dissenting opinion in which he said the jury had seen a markedly different trial than it would have if the withheld evidence had been disclosed. He argued that Johnson had not received a fair trial. Despite this strong dissent, the court denied Johnson's appeal. The United States Supreme Court also declined to hear the case. After all appeals were exhausted, the state of Tennessee set an execution date. In November 2009, Governor Phil Bredesen was asked to grant clemency to Johnson, which would have reduced his sentence to life in prison instead of death. The governor reviewed the case but denied clemency. Johnson's execution was scheduled for December 2, 2009, at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in Nashville. In the final days before the execution, Johnson's lawyers made one last attempt to stop it. They filed emergency appeals with the federal courts, including the United States Supreme Court. They argued that the nearly 3 decades Johnson had spent on death row amounted to cruel and unusual punishment. They also raised other procedural issues. On the night of December 1, 2009, the Supreme Court justices considered the request. Justice John Paul Stevens and Justice Stephen Breyer would have granted a stay of execution, but the other justices disagreed. The Supreme Court officially denied the stay at 1:38 a.m. on December 2nd. About an hour later, the execution proceeded as planned. Johnson was offered a final meal, but he refused to eat anything. He met with his spiritual advisor, Reverend James Thomas, in the hours before his death. He also received a message from his son, James Johnson, who was serving a prison sentence for aggravated assault and robbery in another facility. The son sent word through the warden, "Tell him I love him and forgive him for not being there, and tell him he is not the reason why I am in prison." Johnson's wife, 2 brothers, and daughter were present in the witness room to say goodbye. At 1 a.m. on December 2, 2009, the blinds to the execution room were lifted. Johnson lay strapped to a gurney with medical tubes attached to his skin. He mouthed, "I love you," repeatedly to his family members who were watching. The warden asked if he had any final words. Johnson said, "You all stay strong and keep trusting in the Lord." The warden then gave the order to proceed. The lethal injection was administered. Johnson took 2 deep breaths, fell asleep, and began to snore. His daughter turned away and covered her ears as she watched her father die. At 1:34 a.m., Johnson was officially pronounced dead. In the witness room on the other side of the glass were the victim's family members. Bob Bell Sr. witnessed the execution, as did the brother of James Moore. They did not speak to the media afterward. Johnson's brother David Johnson told reporters, "He's in a better place because he gave his life to the Lord." His wife Sarah Johnson said, "You didn't put away an evil man, you put away a holy man." A small group of anti-death penalty protesters gathered outside the prison to show their opposition to the execution. After Johnson's death, his lawyers raised one final issue. They asked a federal judge to stop the state from performing an autopsy on Johnson's body. They argued that an autopsy would violate his religious beliefs and would amount to desecration. The state medical examiner, however, said that the law required an autopsy because execution was considered an unnatural death, and the only way to confirm the execution had been carried out properly. A federal judge temporarily blocked the autopsy and scheduled a hearing for a later date. This was the final legal matter in the case. Johnson was buried according to his family's wishes. His death marked the end of a long journey that had started on a summer night in 1980 when 3 people lost their lives in a small convenience store. The victims' families had waited nearly 30 years for justice, and they finally received it. The state of Tennessee had carried out its sentence, and Cecil C. Johnson, Jr. was no longer alive to continue his legal battles. The case of Cecil C. Johnson, Jr. came to a complete and final close on December 2, 2009, when he was pronounced dead at 1:34 a.m. Story 4. Bobby Wayne Woods was born on October 11, 1965, in the state of Texas. He was a white male with blonde hair and blue eyes. His mother was named Doris, but Doris did not raise him. Instead, his grandmother, Ruby Woods, took care of him for most of his life. Bobby called his grandmother Mom because she was the one who raised him from a young age. Ruby Woods was the most important person in his family, and he remained close to her throughout his life. He often spoke about her and even sent pictures of himself with her to people he wrote letters to. Bobby went to school like other children, but he did not do well in his classes. He struggled with reading and writing from an early age. He only completed 7 years of formal education. That means he never finished high school and did not receive a diploma. He knew that his spelling was not good, and he often felt embarrassed about his writing skills. He would sometimes ask other people to help him with spelling because he found it very difficult. This problem with reading and writing stayed with him as he grew older. He could not spell big words, and writing things down correctly was a constant challenge for him. When Bobby was a young adult, he did not have a criminal record. He had never been to prison before, and he had not been in serious trouble with the law. He worked as a short-order cook. This means he cooked food in a restaurant or diner, making simple meals quickly. He had jobs that did not require a lot of reading or writing. Besides cooking, Bobby enjoyed many physical activities. He liked to go camping, fishing, and swimming. He also liked hiking in the woods and driving fast cars. He exercised a lot and worked out regularly. He could do thousands of push-ups without stopping, and he could also do many sit-ups and pull-ups. He liked to stay strong and fit. He enjoyed using weight bars and running as well. Bobby had a cousin named Jody Milton. They were close to each other and spent time together. At some point, Bobby lived with Jody. Bobby also had relationships with women. He met a woman named Shawana Patterson, and they became a couple. He moved into her home in Granbury, Texas. Granbury is a town southwest of Fort Worth. He lived with Shawana and her 2 children in that house for about 6 months. The children were an 11-year-old girl named Sarah and a 9-year-old boy named Cody. Bobby lived there as part of the family for that period of time. However, the relationship between Bobby and Shawana did not work out. They had problems, and eventually Shawana asked Bobby to leave. She kicked him out of the house a few days before something important would happen. But at this point in his life, Bobby simply had to find another place to stay after being asked to leave. Bobby also liked to write letters to people. He had a pen pal from Germany, and he wanted to find more pen pals in the United States. He said in his letters that he got along better with women than with men. He found it easier to talk to women and be friends with them. He also wrote that he did not like being around other men very much. His letters showed that he was lonely and wanted to connect with people. He often mentioned his grandmother Ruby and how much she meant to him. He tried to be friendly in his letters, even though he knew his spelling was not perfect. He hoped people would not make fun of him for his writing mistakes. Bobby's life before the year 1997 was mostly ordinary. He worked, he exercised, he spent time with his grandmother, and he tried to have relationships with women. He had problems with reading and writing, but he managed to get by. He had lived with Shwana and her children, but that had ended when she asked him to leave. He was now staying elsewhere and figuring out what to do next. He did not have any serious criminal history. He was a man in his early 30s who had struggled with school, but had found ways to live his life. His grandmother remained his main family connection, and he still thought of her as his mother. He continued to write letters and try to make friends, but his life was about to take a very different turn. On the night of April 29, 1997, Bobby Wayne Woods went to the Patterson home in Granbury, Texas. He entered the house while Shwana Patterson was not there. He stole a VCR and a Sega video game from the home. He then took these items and pawned them. The pawn ticket had his signature and his address on it. The next day, very early in the morning of April 30th, 1997, Woods went back to the Patterson house. He had used drugs before going there. He took a drug called crank and also PCP. These drugs can make a person act in strange and violent ways. Woods arrived at the house while it was still dark. Shwana was not at home at that time. Only her two children, Sarah and Cody, were sleeping inside the house. Woods walked around the outside of the house. He found a window that was open. This window was in the bedroom where Sarah and Cody slept together in the same bed. Woods crawled through the open window and entered the children's bedroom. He grabbed Sarah by her foot. This woke her up and she started to scream. Cody also woke up because he heard his sister screaming. Woods then began to beat Sarah on her chest with his fists. He hit her hard. After that, he sexually molested her. This means he touched her in a sexual way that was wrong and against the law. After Woods finished hurting Sarah, he forced both children to leave the house. He made them crawl back out through the same open window. They were only wearing their night clothes. They did not have time to put on shoes or regular clothes. Cody did not want to leave. He was scared, but Woods made them go anyway. Woods put both children into his car. This car actually belonged to his grandmother, but he was driving it. Woods drove the children about 4 miles away to a place called Thorpe Springs Cemetery. This was a graveyard in a remote area. On the way to the cemetery, Cody was sitting in the back seat. He noticed a black-handled knife in the back of the car. This knife would become important later. While they were driving, Woods reached back and hit Cody on the arm because the children were fighting with each other in the car. When they arrived at the cemetery, Woods stopped the car. He told Cody to get out of the vehicle. He told Sarah to lie down in the front seat. Woods took Cody outside the car. He started asking Cody questions about his mother. He asked Cody if his mother was seeing any other men. Then Woods began to hit Cody. He struck Cody multiple times on the head. He hit him very hard. He also stomped on Cody's head with his feet. After beating him, Woods grabbed Cody around the neck and strangled him. He choked Cody for almost 5 minutes. Cody lost consciousness. He passed out and stopped breathing for a while. Woods believed Cody was dead. He left Cody lying on the ground at the cemetery and drove away with Sarah. Sarah was now alone in the car with Woods. She started screaming. She was very scared and upset. She told Woods that she would tell the police what he had done to Cody. Woods wanted to make her stop screaming. He took out a large butcher knife. He held the knife to Sarah's throat. He later said that he was just trying to quiet her, but she moved suddenly and the knife cut her throat. The cut was very deep. It severed her larynx, which is the voice box, and also cut several major arteries and veins in her neck. Sarah lost a huge amount of blood very quickly. She died from extreme blood loss. Her throat had been cut so deeply that she could not survive. After Sarah was dead, Woods put her body in a secluded area off Highway 144. Her body was clothed in an inside-out shirt, a sports bra, and a pair of shorts. She was not wearing any underwear. Woods then left her body there. Meanwhile, Cody woke up at the cemetery many hours later. It was now late in the afternoon. He had been unconscious for about 14 hours. He could not see very well. He was having triple vision. He was also very weak and could not stand up or scream for help. But he managed to crawl over a fence. A person who was riding a horse nearby saw Cody. The horseback rider found him and took him to a nearby house. They called 911 for help. Cody was taken to a hospital in Fort Worth. He had to have surgery to remove pieces of his skull that had been pushed into his brain from the beating. He had many injuries all over his body. He was also badly sunburned and dehydrated from being left in the cemetery all day. Woods had injuries too. He had scratches on his face and on his right arm. These scratches had not been there before the crimes. When people asked him about the scratches, he gave different answers. He told one person that he got the scratches while hauling off brush. He told another person that he had been jumped by 3 men. He told someone else that he had run through briars to escape. He also said he had the shingles. Then he told police officers that a pet squirrel scratched him, and later he said it was a cat. He could not keep his story straight. Woods also tried to hide evidence. The morning after the abduction, he borrowed a trash bag from a neighbor. Inside that trash bag, he placed the large butcher knife that had Sarah's blood all over it. He also put the pawn ticket with his signature and address inside the same bag. He had pawned the VCR and video game he had stolen from the Patterson home the day before. The pawn ticket proved he had been in the house and had stolen items. Sarah's panties were later found on the floorboard of Wood's car. Sarah's blood was also found on a jersey that was in the back of his car. There was also evidence that Woods had sexual contact with Sarah. His semen was found on her blanket. Both Woods and Sarah had the same sexually transmitted disease called HPV, which stands for human papillomavirus. This showed that Woods had given the disease to Sarah or that they had a sexual connection. Forensic evidence later showed that Sarah had been sexually molested shortly before she died. During this time, Woods' cousin Jody Milton was also involved in some way. Woods later claimed that Milton was the one who actually killed Sarah. But a few days after the murder, Jody Milton hanged himself and died. This meant he could not be questioned or brought to trial. Woods insisted that Milton was responsible, but the physical evidence pointed directly to Woods. The children's mother, Shwana, realized her children were missing around 6 o'clock in the morning on April 30th. She searched the house and saw they had not dressed for school. She called the authorities. The police were alerted that the children had been taken. People noticed that Woods had scratches on his face and gave conflicting stories about them. But at this point, the police had not yet arrested him or fully investigated what had happened. They were still trying to find Sarah and understand what had occurred. Cody Patterson woke up at the Thorpe Springs Cemetery in the late afternoon of April 30th, 1997. He had been unconscious for about 14 hours. He could barely see, and he was too weak to stand or shout. Despite his injuries, he managed to crawl over a fence. A person who was riding a horse in the area saw Cody and went to help him. The horseback rider took Cody to a nearby house, and the people there called 911 for emergency help. Cody was taken by ambulance to Cook's Children's Hospital in Fort Worth. He had severe injuries to his skull. His skull had been pushed inward from the force of the blows. Doctors performed surgery to remove bone fragments from his brain. He also had bruises and red welts all over his body from the beating and from ant bites. He was sunburned and dehydrated from lying in the cemetery all day. While Cody was being treated, the police began their investigation. They had already been notified that the children were missing. Based on information from Cody, who told them what had happened, the police focused their search on Bobby Wayne Woods. They found Woods and brought him in for questioning. The police hoped that Sarah might still be alive, so they asked Woods to tell them where she was. Woods did not give them hope. He told the officers, "You will not find her alive. I cut her throat." After saying this, he led the police to Sarah's body. He showed them where he had left her off Highway 144. The police arrested Woods. He had already been arrested the night before on April 30th for burglary because he had stolen items from the Patterson home. But now he was also charged with more serious crimes. On May 2nd, 1997, a warrant was issued for his arrest for the attempted capital murder of Cody. Woods gave 2 written statements to the police. In these statements, he admitted that he had taken the children, that he had hit Cody, and that Sarah's throat had been cut. He also admitted to having sexual contact with Sarah. However, he later claimed that his written statements were not accurate because he had trouble reading and writing. He said the police had written the statements, and he had signed them without fully understanding them. The police gathered a large amount of physical evidence. They found Woods' semen on Sarah's blanket. They found a large butcher knife covered with Sarah's blood inside a trash bag that Woods had borrowed from a neighbor. The bag also contained a pawn ticket with Woods' signature and address for items he had stolen from the Patterson home. Sarah's panties were found on the floorboard of Woods' car. Sarah's blood was on a jersey in the back of his car. Woods had scratches on his face and arms that had not been there before the crimes. Both Woods and Sarah had the same sexually transmitted disease, HPV, which showed they had a sexual connection. All of this evidence pointed directly to Woods as the person who committed the crimes. Because there was a lot of news coverage in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Woods' lawyers asked for the trial to be moved to a different location. The judge agreed, and the trial was moved to Llano County, which is about 65 miles northwest of Austin. The trial began in May 1998. During the trial, Cody Patterson testified about what had happened to him and his sister. The judge had to decide if Cody was old enough and smart enough to be a witness. After asking Cody questions to make sure he knew the difference between telling the truth and telling a lie, the judge ruled that Cody could testify. Cody told the jury how Woods had beaten Sarah, forced them out the window, driven them to the cemetery, and then attacked him. Woods also testified in his own defense. He admitted that he had taken the children from the house and that he had hit Cody. But he gave a different story about what happened to Sarah. He said that his cousin Jody Milton was the one who killed Sarah. Woods claimed that Milton had agreed to take care of Sarah and that Milton was responsible for cutting her throat. However, Jody Milton had hanged himself a few days after the murder, so he could not be questioned or brought to court. The jury did not believe Woods' story. The physical evidence, including Woods' own signed confessions, showed that he was the one who had committed the crimes. The jury found Woods guilty of capital murder on May 21, 1998. Capital murder is a very serious crime that can result in the death penalty. The trial then moved to the punishment phase, where the jury had to decide if Woods should be sentenced to death or to life in prison. The prosecutors presented evidence that Woods was dangerous and would likely commit more violent acts in the future. They pointed to his violent behavior during the crimes and his use of knives. They also showed that he had an antisocial personality disorder. The defense tried to show that Woods had mental problems and might be mentally retarded. A psychologist hired by the defense testified that Woods was mentally retarded, but this psychologist had not actually examined Woods. A psychiatrist for the prosecution testified that Woods was not retarded and could commit future violence. The jury decided that Woods should receive the death penalty. On May 28, 1998, the judge sentenced Bobby Wayne Woods to death. He was also given a life sentence for the attempted capital murder of Cody Patterson. After his conviction, Woods began a long series of appeals. His lawyers argued that his conviction and death sentence should be overturned. They pointed to problems with his arrest warrant, the evidence, and his mental abilities. His direct appeal went to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, which affirmed his conviction and sentence in 2000. He then filed appeals in federal court. In 2002, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals denied his request for relief. In 2007, The same court rejected another appeal in which Woods claimed he was mentally retarded and should not be executed. The U.S. Supreme Court had ruled in 2002 that executing mentally retarded people was unconstitutional, but states were allowed to define mental retardation. Woods' IQ was tested multiple times. He scored 70 on one test, and other tests showed scores in the 60s and 80s. A score of 70 is often considered the threshold for mental impairment. However, the courts reviewed the evidence and concluded that Woods was not mentally retarded. They pointed out that he had not been in special education classes, he had a driver's license, he had worked as a cook, and he had checked out over 100 books from the jail library while waiting for his trial. Woods was scheduled to be executed in January 2008, but that date was postponed because the U.S. Supreme Court was considering whether lethal injection was constitutional. He was scheduled again for October 2008, but the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals granted a stay so his mental competency could be evaluated again. Finally, a new execution date was set for December 3, 2009. On that day, Woods was given a final meal. He requested chicken sandwiches, hamburgers, and half a pound of chocolate cake. However, he only ate a few bites of the food. Around 6 p.m., he was taken to the execution chamber in Huntsville, Texas. The warden asked if he had a final statement. Woods lifted his head from the gurney and said 3 words. "Bye. I'm ready." The lethal injection was started. At 6:40 p.m., Bobby Wayne Woods was pronounced dead. After the execution, the effects of the case continued. Cody Patterson survived his injuries. He recovered from the attack and went on to live his life. He said that the nightmares about the attack eventually stopped, but he still had scars on the back of his head from his injuries. When Woods was executed, Cody was 21 years old. He stood outside the prison, but chose not to watch the execution. He said he was glad it was finally over. Sarah's father, Larry Patterson, watched the execution and said that justice had been done, noting that Sarah had not been given a second chance. Shwana Patterson, the children's mother, was also held responsible for her role in the events. She was arrested and charged with injury to a child by omission, meaning she had failed to protect her children. She was convicted in September 1998 and sentenced to 23 years in prison. However, on appeal, her conviction was reduced to a lesser charge, and her sentence was reduced to 8 years. She was paroled in March 2005 and released from parole supervision in September 2006. The case of Bobby Wayne Woods came to a final end on December 3, 2009, when he was executed for the murder of 11-year-old Sarah Patterson. Story 5. Kenneth Byros was born on June 24, 1958. He was a white male. He grew up in Ohio. He lived with his parents and his siblings. He had a brother named Kari Byros. He also had sisters. The family home was on King Graves Road in Brookfield Township, Ohio. Kenneth's childhood was very difficult. His father was named Pete Byros. Pete Byros was a domineering and tyrannical man. He treated his family as if they were his property. He did not show them love or affection. Instead, he belittled them and berated them. He isolated his wife and children from other family members and friends. He was also very jealous. He often accused his wife, Joan Byros, of being unfaithful. He would threaten to kill her. He also threatened to commit suicide. Kenneth grew up in this tense and unhappy household. His father's behavior shaped his early life in a negative way. Despite the difficult home life, Kenneth and his family tried to build normal lives. His mother, his sisters, and Kenneth himself all worked steadily. They also managed to graduate from college. For Kenneth, getting a college degree took a long time. He worked toward it for 13 years. He did not give up. He finally finished and earned his degree. Throughout his adult life, he was employed most of the time. He held jobs and supported himself. When Kenneth was older, a psychologist who later evaluated him described his family as extremely dysfunctional. Kenneth had some personal struggles. He had a personality disorder. He also had a lifelong dependence on alcohol. He suffered from depression. In his early adult life, he had very few encounters with the law. Before the major events of his life, he had only one arrest for theft in 1977. He also had a conviction in 1986 for either driving under the influence of alcohol or reckless operation of a motor vehicle. These were his only known legal problems. He did not have a significant history of prior crimes. He lived with his mother and his brother in their home on King Graves Road. He went to work, he spent time with his family, and he kept to himself. His life continued in this routine. On Thursday, February 7th, 1991, Kenneth Byros went to a bar called the Nickelodeon Lounge in Massery, Ohio. He arrived around 11 p.m. Earlier that evening, he had taken part in a drinking event that was sponsored by the Nickelodeon and other bars. He had already been drinking for some time before he arrived. At the same bar that night, there was a 22-year-old woman named Tammy Engstrom. She had come to the Nickelodeon to visit her uncle, who was a regular customer there. Tammy had arrived around 10 p.m. She was wearing a black leather coat, a sweater, black pants, black shoes, and black stockings. She was also wearing a diamond cluster ring that was worth about $1,200. She had bought that ring from a friend a few weeks earlier. She was carrying a small gray purse, and a witness later said the purse contained a lot of money. Tammy had several alcoholic drinks while she was at the bar. She also spoke with her uncle and other people. By midnight, Tammy had passed out. She was either very sick or very intoxicated. She was sitting at a table when she lost consciousness. Later, she fell off her chair and landed on the floor. Her uncle and Kenneth Byros helped her get back into her seat. Byros knew Tammy's uncle, but he did not know Tammy herself. They were strangers to each other. At around 1 a.m., the bar closed. Byros and Tammy's uncle helped Tammy walk outside to the parking lot. Tammy was still very intoxicated. She insisted that she wanted to drive herself home, but her uncle saw that she was too drunk to drive safely. He took her car keys away from her. At that point, Byros volunteered to take Tammy to get some coffee. He said this would help her sober up. Tammy's uncle agreed. He handed Tammy her purse and noticed she was still wearing her leather coat. At about 1:15 a.m., Byros and Tammy left the Nickelodeon in Byros's car. Tammy's uncle stayed at the bar after it closed and waited for Byros to bring Tammy back. But Byros never returned. Instead of taking Tammy for coffee, Byros drove to a different place. He drove to a secluded area near his home on King Graves Road. There was a railroad track there. He drove his car along the gravel path next to the railroad tracks. This path led close to his house. Tammy was asleep in the car. Byros reached over and touched her hand. Then he moved his hand further and touched or felt her leg. Tammy woke up. She became frightened. She did not know where she was. She started yelling at Byros. She said she did not know him and asked where they were. She hit him and screamed. Byros reacted by hitting her with his forearm. Then Tammy jumped out of the car and ran along the railroad tracks. Byros drove the car along the tracks to try to catch up to her. He wanted to stop her, but instead the car struck Tammy. She fell and hit her head on the steel rail of the railroad track. Byros got out of the car. He rolled Tammy over. She was bleeding. Her head was against the rail. Tammy was still alive. She pushed Byros. She screamed at him and swore at him. She also threw rocks at him. Byros then pulled out a pocket knife. He wanted to calm her down, but Tammy grabbed the knife. They struggled over it. Byros cut his hand during the struggle. He managed to get the knife back. Tammy kept screaming, so Byros pinned her down. He put his hand over her mouth to stop her from making noise. He kept his hand there until she stopped struggling. When he took his hand away, he realized that she had died. Byros had strangled Tammy to death. The strangulation took about 4 to 5 minutes. During that time, she vomited and choked. After she was dead, Byros became upset and frustrated. He stabbed her 5 times. These stab wounds happened right after she died. Then Byros panicked. He drove home. He washed his clothes and tended to his own wounds. But about 15 to 20 minutes later, he went back to Tammy's body. He was very angry. He believed that Tammy had destroyed his life. He took his pocket knife and began cutting her body. He removed her clothes because they were in the way. He then dragged the body into the woods. As he dragged it, he felt her diamond ring cutting into his hand. He took the ring off her finger and put it in his pocket. He tried to bury the whole body in a shallow hole, but the body was too big, so he cut off the head and the right leg with his pocket knife. He put these parts in a separate hole. He also buried her clothes in other holes. Later that Friday morning, Byros found Tammy's purse in his car. He burned the purse in his fireplace. He also washed his car to clean it. Byros then started lying to everyone. Tammy's husband, Andy Engstrom, had been looking for her. When he learned that Byros was the last person seen with Tammy, he went to Byros's home and confronted him. Byros told Andy a story. He said that after they left the bar, he tapped Tammy on the shoulder. He claimed she freaked out, got out of the car, and started running through people's yards in Sharon, Pennsylvania. He said he chased her but could not catch her. He later told another version to police, claiming she fell out and hit her head on railroad tracks. Throughout that day, Byros told the same story to many people. He told Tammy's mother, her brother, her uncles, her friends, and others. He told them all that Tammy had jumped out of his car and run away near a garage on Davis Street in Sharon, Pennsylvania. He said he chased her but gave up because he was drunk and did not want to get caught driving under the influence. Several people who saw him that day noticed fresh cuts and scratches on his hands. They also saw a fresh wound above his right eye. These injuries had not been there the night before. Byros gave false explanations for these wounds. He said he cut his hands when he was locked out of his house and had to break a window. He said the cut above his eye came from chopping wood. Tammy's family threatened Byros. Her brother said he would kill Byros if Tammy was hurt. One uncle said he would rip Byros's heart out. Tammy's mother told Byros that if he put one scratch on her daughter, she would kill him. Byros tried to calm them. He told Tammy's mother not to worry, and that her daughter would be just fine. On Friday evening, Byros even helped Tammy's relatives search for her in the area where he claimed she had jumped out. They searched the yards and streets in Sharon, Pennsylvania. They did not find her. Later that same day, Byros's mother found a gold ring on the bathroom floor of their home. She asked Byros about it the next day. At first, he said he knew nothing about it. He told his mother the ring looked like cheap gold. When his mother said it was not cheap, Byros then suggested that it might belong to the girl who jumped out of his car. He took the ring from his mother and said he would return it to the Nickelodeon. But he did not return it. Instead, he hid the ring in the ceiling of his house. That Friday night, while his brother was watching television inside, Byros went outside to a pasture behind the house. His brother went outside to see what he was doing. Byros said he was watching stars. His brother went back inside and went to bed. But Byros was not watching stars. He was retrieving Tammy's body parts from where he had buried them. Because Tammy's relatives had confronted him and threatened him, he decided to move the body. He loaded the body parts into his car and drove them to Pennsylvania. He disposed of them in 2 different, desolate wooded areas. One site was in Butler County, Pennsylvania. The other site was about 30 miles north, in Venango County, Pennsylvania. He left Tammy's body parts scattered in the woods. Her head and right breast were cut off from her torso. Her right leg was cut off above the knee. Her body was naked except for some remnants of black stockings that had been rolled down to her feet. Her torso was cut open, and many of her internal organs were removed. Her anus, rectum, and most of her sexual organs were cut out and never found again. He had done all of this after she was dead. On Saturday, February 9th, Tammy's family and friends continued searching for her. They also searched a wooded area near the railroad tracks close to Byros' home, but they did not find anything. On Saturday, February 9th, 1991, the police became involved. Tammy Engstrom had not come home, and her family was very worried. The police called Byros' home and left a message. They asked him to come to the police station for questioning. Byros heard the message and drove to the Brookfield Township Police Station on his own. He was not arrested. He was told he was free to leave at any time. He sat in an interview room with police officers. He repeated the same story he had told everyone else. He said Tammy had jumped out of his car on Davis Street in Sharon, Pennsylvania, and ran away. But Captain John Clarick from the Sharon Police Department did not believe him. Clarick asked Byros more questions. He suggested that maybe Byros had made a sexual advance toward Tammy, and that caused her to jump out. Byros denied this. Clarick suggested other scenarios. Finally, Clarick suggested that maybe an accident happened where Tammy fell out of the car and hit her head. At that point, Byros said yes and admitted he had done something very bad. Clarick asked to speak to Byros alone. The other officers left the room. Byros then told Clarick that they were in the car together near the railroad tracks. He said he touched her hand and then went further and touched her leg. He said she pushed his hand away, opened the door while the car was still moving, fell out, and struck her head on the railroad tracks. He told Clarick that Tammy was dead. He said this happened near the railroad tracks on King Graves Road. At that moment, the police stopped questioning Byros. They read him his Miranda rights, which inform a suspect of the right to remain silent and the right to an attorney. Byros signed a paper saying he understood these rights and agreed to waive them. He then repeated his story to another detective. He also said that Tammy's body was in Pennsylvania. The police asked him for the exact location. At that point, Byros asked to speak with a lawyer. The police stopped questioning him. Later, after Byros talked to his lawyer, he agreed to show the police where Tammy's body was. In the early morning hours of Sunday, February 10th, 1991, police and authorities went to the locations Byros showed them. In Butler County, Pennsylvania, they found several of Tammy's severed body parts in a desolate wooded area. They found other parts in Venango County, Pennsylvania, about 30 miles north of the first site. The body parts were in the condition described earlier. Head severed, right breast severed, right leg amputated, torso cut open, and internal organs removed. After that, investigators searched the area of the railroad tracks near King Graves Road, where Byros said the incident happened. They found a large area of blood-stained gravel near the tracks. They also found blood spatters on the side of one steel track. More bloodstains were found in the same area. Tests showed these bloodstains matched Tammy's blood. They also found what appeared to be part of Tammy's intestines in a swampy area near the tracks. DNA testing later confirmed it was her remains. About a month later, police found Tammy's black leather coat partially buried a short distance from the tracks. There were 2 cut marks on the collar. They also found her house keys and a tube of lipstick in a shallow hole near the coat. They found one of her black leather shoes in the area. Inside the shoe, a forensic scientist found a single pubic hair. Tests showed this hair was consistent with Tammy's pubic hair. The police also searched Byros' home. They found a blood-stained pocket knife hidden in his basement. They found a much larger knife in his bathroom. They found a blood-stained coat in his bedroom. This was the coat Byros had worn to the bar on the night of the murder. Tests showed the blood on the knife, and the coat matched Tammy's blood. They also took a pair of size 11 tennis shoes from his bedroom. In the tread of one shoe, they found a single hair. Tests showed this hair was consistent with Tammy's head hair. The police also searched the car Byros had driven to the police station. They found numerous bloodstains that matched Tammy's blood. They also found some bloodstains that matched Byros' own blood. Inside the trunk, they found a small piece of human tissue. This was later believed to be Tammy's liver tissue. Dr. William A. Cox, the Summit County coroner, performed the autopsy on Tammy's body. He was a board-certified forensic pathologist. He found that Tammy had suffered 91 injuries that happened before she died. These injuries showed a severe beating and an attempt at sexual mutilation. She had 5 stab wounds that were inflicted immediately after her death. Her head, right breast, and right lower leg had been cut off after she died. Her anus, rectum, urinary bladder, and almost all of her sexual organs had been removed and were never recovered. Some of her internal organs, including part of her liver and bowel, were also removed. Dr. Cox determined that the cause of death was strangulation. He found that she had been strangled for 4 to 5 minutes. The hyoid bone in her neck was fractured, which confirmed strangulation. He found no evidence that she had been struck by a car, which contradicted Byros' later claims. Dr. Cox also determined that a pocket knife could have caused some wounds, but a much larger and heavier knife was used to cut off the head and leg. The large knife found in Byros' bathroom was consistent with the type used for those amputations. On February 14, 1991, a grand jury indicted Byros on several charges. He was charged with aggravated murder, which carried 2 death penalty specifications. The specifications said he killed Tammy during the commission of aggravated robbery and attempted rape. He was also charged with felonious sexual penetration, aggravated robbery, and attempted rape. He was also charged with abuse of a corpse, but that charge was later dismissed before trial. The trial began. Byros testified in his own defense. He told his version of events, claiming he accidentally killed her when he placed his hand over her mouth and that he never intended to hurt her. He admitted cutting her body, but said he did it in a blind rage. He denied having any sexual intentions. He also denied stealing the ring, even though he took it and hid it. The prosecution presented all the forensic evidence and witness testimony. The defense called a forensic pathologist, Dr. Carl Williams, who had not examined the body personally. He disagreed with some of Dr. Cox's conclusions, but he admitted on cross-examination that manual strangulation had to be considered. The jury found Byros guilty of all charges, except the dismissed abuse of corpse charge. They also found both death penalty specifications to be true. After a separate hearing to consider mitigating factors, the jury recommended that Byros be sentenced to death. The trial judge accepted this recommendation and sentenced Kenneth Byros to death on October 29, 1991. Byros appealed his conviction and death sentence. The case went to the Ohio Supreme Court. In 1997, the Ohio Supreme Court affirmed his convictions and death sentence. They rejected his arguments about the indictment, his statements to police, the admission of gruesome photographs, and the sufficiency of the evidence. They also independently reviewed the death sentence and found it proportionate and appropriate. Byros later filed a petition for a writ of habeas corpus in federal court. In 2005, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled on his case. The district court had initially granted relief on his death sentence due to a technical issue with the indictment, but the Sixth Circuit reversed that decision. They held that the issue was procedurally defaulted and also harmless, because Byros was the only offender and the outcome would have been the same. They denied all his claims and upheld his conviction and death sentence. For years, Byros remained on death row at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility in Lucasville, Ohio. His execution was scheduled multiple times, but was delayed due to legal challenges. On December 8, 2009, Kenneth Byros was executed by lethal injection. This execution was historic because Ohio had recently changed its execution method. Previously, Ohio used a three-drug combination. But in September 2009, an execution attempt on another inmate failed when officials could not find a vein for 2 hours. After that, Ohio switched to a single drug method using a large dose of sodium thiopental, a powerful anesthetic. This was the first time this single drug method had been used in the United States. On the morning of December 8, 2009, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected Byros's final appeal at around 10 a.m. This caused a 1-hour delay. At the prison, the execution team struggled for about 30 minutes to find a suitable vein. They tried 9 times before successfully inserting in 4 line into his left arm. They could not start a line in his right arm. Once the drug began flowing, Byros's chest heaved several times, and he moved his head twice over the next 2 minutes. Then he lay still. He was pronounced dead at 11:47 a.m., about 10 minutes after the drug started. Before he died, Byros gave a final statement. He said, "I'm sorry from the bottom of my heart. I want to thank all of my family and friends for my prayers and who supported and believed in me. My Father, now I'm being paroled to heaven. I will now spend all of my holidays with my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Peace be with you all. Amen." Tammy Engstrom's family members witnessed the execution. Her mother, Mary Jane Heiss, watched from her wheelchair while using an oxygen tank. Her sister, Debbie Heiss, and her brother, Tom Heiss, were also present. After Byros was pronounced dead, the family applauded briefly. They said they were glad he was gone and that it brought closure to their family. However, they also felt the execution was too peaceful and that Byros should have suffered more for what he did to Tammy. After the execution, Byros's body was taken away. The case was officially closed. Tammy's family continued to live with the memory of what happened to her. Tammy's son, Casey, who was only a year and a half old when his mother was murdered, grew up without her. He later became an adult and opposed any clemency for Byros. Kenneth Byros's execution on December 8, 2009, marked the end of the legal process. He was the 51st person executed in the United States that year and the 5th executed in Ohio. The story of Tammy Engstrom's murder and Kenneth Byros's eventual punishment came to its final conclusion on that day.